The concrete floor of the training facility was cold beneath Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez's boots as she stood in the center of the sparring mat. 165 Marines filled the bleachers around her, their conversations creating a low hum that bounced off the gymnasium walls. The overhead fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the blue training mats, and the air smelled of rubber, sweat, and industrial disinfectant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 2 Navy SEALs circled her slowly, their movements predatory and deliberate. The taller one, Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison, rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles. His partner, Petty Officer Second Class Brett Hawkins, grinned as he adjusted his stance. Both men outweighed her by at least 60 pounds. Maya kept her hands loose at her sides, her breathing controlled. The silence that had fallen over the crowd was deafening. In 10 seconds, everything would change. The reputation she had built over 8 years of service, the respect she had earned through countless hours of training, the message she would send to every woman in uniform, it all hinged on what happened next. Morrison stepped closer, his hand reaching toward her shoulder with casual arrogance. The fluorescent lights reflected off the dog tags hanging from his neck. The crowd leaned forward in their seats. This was the moment that would define everything. Maya's peripheral vision caught the slight shift in Morrison's weight as his fingers brushed against her shoulder. The contact lasted exactly 2 seconds, long enough for her to register the inappropriate nature of the touch, long enough for the crowd to see what was happening, long enough for her muscle memory to kick in with devastating precision. Her right hand came up in a sharp arc, fingers locked rigid as they struck the inside of Morrison's extended wrist. The sound of bone meeting bone echoed through the gymnasium like a gunshot. His radius snapped with a wet crack that made several Marines in the front row wince visibly. Morrison's scream pierced the air as he stumbled backward, his arm hanging at an unnatural angle. His face drained of color, shock replacing the cocky smirk that had been there moments before. But Maya was already moving. Hawkins lunged forward, either to help his partner or to grab her. The distinction didn't matter. Maya pivoted on her left foot, her body coiling like a spring as she drove her elbow upward into his approaching forearm. The impact sent vibrations through her own bones, but Hawkins got the worse end of the exchange. His ulna fractured with a sound like a dry branch breaking, and he dropped to his knees with a howl that harmonized grotesquely with Morrison's continued screaming. The entire sequence had taken less than 6 seconds. The gymnasium fell into stunned silence except for the labored breathing of the 2 injured SEALs and the hum of the ventilation system overhead. Maya remained in her fighting stance for another heartbeat, her dark eyes scanning for additional threats, before straightening. Slowly, her hands dropped to her sides, but her posture remained alert. Morrison was cradling his shattered wrist against his chest, blood beginning to seep through his fingers where bone fragments had punctured skin. Hawkins knelt on the mat beside him, his own broken arm held protectively against his torso. Both men's faces were pale and sweaty. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. The crowd of Marines remained frozen in place, their expressions ranging from shock to admiration to barely concealed satisfaction. Some leaned forward in their seats as if trying to process what they had just witnessed. Others sat back with their arms crossed, nodding slowly in approval. Maya looked down at the 2 men at her feet without a trace of sympathy in her expression. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady and clear enough to carry to every corner of the gymnasium. "I said no touching during the demonstration." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Several Marines shifted uncomfortably in their seats, remembering their own assumptions about what would happen when 2 elite special operations soldiers faced off against a female staff sergeant in hand-to-hand combat training. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been the Marine Corps' top-ranked female combatives instructor for 3 consecutive years. She held black belts in 3 different martial arts disciplines and had personally trained over 2,000 Marines in close quarters combat techniques. Her service record included 2 combat deployments and a Bronze Star for valor. But none of that seemed to matter to the 2 SEALs who had volunteered to be her demonstration partners 20 minutes earlier. The demonstration had been scheduled as part of a joint training exercise at Camp Pendleton. The topic was supposed to be defensive tactics against larger opponents, a practical skill set that every service member needed to master regardless of their size or gender. Maya had requested volunteers from the audience to help demonstrate proper technique and body mechanics. Morrison and Hawkins had practically sprinted down from the bleachers, their enthusiasm drawing cheers from several other SEALs scattered throughout the crowd. Maya had seen their type before, operators who viewed every interaction as a chance to prove their dominance, especially when facing someone they perceived as weaker. She had explained the parameters clearly before they stepped onto the mat. This was a controlled demonstration, not a competition. She would show various defensive techniques while they provided graduated resistance. No strikes to the head, no full force grappling, and absolutely no inappropriate contact. Both men had nodded their understanding, but Maya caught the look they exchanged, a silent communication that suggested they had their own agenda for how this demonstration would unfold. The first 15 minutes had proceeded smoothly. Maya demonstrated proper stance, balance, and leverage techniques, while Morrison and Hawkins played the role of cooperative training partners. They followed her instructions, moved at the pace she set, and allowed her to showcase the principles of defensive combat without trying to overpower her demonstrations. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the way some of the younger Marines in the audience were paying closer attention to her techniques than the SEALs had expected. Maybe it was the realization that she was genuinely skilled and not just going through the motions for show. Or maybe they had planned this from the beginning, viewing the demonstration as an opportunity to publicly embarrass a female instructor in front of a large audience. Whatever the motivation, Morrison had started adding unnecessary force to his movements. When Maya demonstrated her wrist escape technique, he gripped harder than required. When she showed how to break free from a bear hug, he held on longer than instructed. Small violations of the agreed-upon parameters, but violations nonetheless. Hawkins had followed his partner's lead, becoming increasingly aggressive in his approach. What started as cooperative training partners gradually transformed into 2 men who seemed determined to prove that their superior size and strength could overcome any technique Maya tried to demonstrate. The crowd had begun to sense the shift in dynamics. Conversations died away as Marines focused more intently on the action in the center of the mat. Some looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others leaned forward with anticipation, wondering how Maya would handle the escalating situation. Maya had maintained her professional composure throughout, adapting her demonstrations to account for the increased resistance while making it clear through her body language that she was aware of what was happening. Her movements remained controlled and precise, but there was a new tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there at the beginning. The breaking point came when Morrison decided to improvise beyond the planned demonstration. Instead of simply providing resistance for Maya's technique, he had reached out with his free hand to touch her shoulder, a move that served no training purpose and crossed every boundary of professional conduct. That touch had been his mistake. And Hawkins' decision to follow up with his own aggressive move had been equally costly. Now both SEALs knelt on the training mat with compound fractures, their earlier bravado replaced by genuine pain and shock. The lesson they had intended to teach about male physical superiority had backfired spectacularly. Instead, they had provided Maya with the perfect opportunity to demonstrate that technique, timing, and training could overcome raw strength, especially when that strength was wielded by someone stupid enough to telegraph their intentions. Maya stepped back from the two injured men, her movements calm and controlled. She looked up at the crowd of Marines, her expression serious but not hostile. When she spoke again, her voice carried clearly through the gymnasium. "Medical personnel are en route. The demonstration will continue once these gentlemen receive appropriate treatment." The matter-of-fact tone of her announcement sent ripples of appreciation through the crowd. No gloating, no celebration of her victory, just professional acknowledgement of the situation and a clear intention to continue with the training schedule. 2. Navy corpsmen pushed through the crowd and jogged down to the mat, their medical bags already open. They knelt beside Morrison and Hawkins, beginning immediate assessment of the injuries while calling for stretchers over their radios. Maya watched the medical response with the same calm attention she had given everything else, ready to provide details about the mechanism of injury if asked. She showed no signs of remorse or concern for the two men's condition. They had made their choices and were now dealing with the consequences. The gymnasium buzzed with quiet conversation as Marines processed what they had just witnessed. Some pulled out their phones to text friends who hadn't been present. Others simply stared at Maya with new levels of respect and wariness. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had just delivered a master class in more than defensive tactics. She had shown 165 Marines what happened when assumptions met reality, when arrogance encountered skill, and when someone made the mistake of confusing restraint for weakness. The two stretchers arrived within minutes, and Morrison and Hawkins were loaded onto them with careful attention to their injured limbs. As they were carried toward the exit, neither man made eye contact with Maya or the crowd. Their faces showed pain, embarrassment, and the dawning realization that their actions would have consequences far beyond their immediate injuries. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya remained on the mat as the medical team cleared the area, her posture relaxed but alert. She looked up at the crowd again, scanning the faces of the Marines who would remember this moment for the rest of their careers. That the demonstration was far from over. This was just the beginning. The silence in the gymnasium stretched for another 10 seconds after the medical team disappeared through the exit doors with Morrison and Hawkins. Maya stood alone on the blue training mat, her hands clasped behind her back in a parade rest position, waiting for the crowd to process what they had witnessed. The overhead lights hummed steadily, casting the same harsh shadows they had minutes before. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Colonel Patricia Vance sat in the front row of the bleachers, her silver eagles catching the fluorescent glare as she leaned forward slightly. As the commanding officer of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit's Training Division, she had personally requested Maya for this demonstration. The colonel's weathered face showed no emotion, but her sharp blue eyes tracked every detail of Maya's posture and demeanor. Behind Colonel Vance, the assembled Marines represented a cross-section of the Corps' operational units. Infantry Marines from the 1st Battalion sat alongside logistics specialists from the 3rd Supply Battalion. Military police officers were scattered throughout the crowd, along with communications technicians, motor transport operators, and combat engineers. The diversity of military occupational specialties meant that word of today's events would spread through multiple command structures within hours. Captain Derek Walsh, the officer who had coordinated the joint training exercise, stood near the gymnasium's entrance with a clipboard pressed against his chest. His face had gone pale when Maya broke Morrison's wrist, and he had been frantically typing messages on his phone ever since. The presence of injured Navy personnel at a Marine Corps training event would generate significant paperwork and potentially uncomfortable questions from higher headquarters. Maya had volunteered for this assignment specifically because she understood the broader implications. Female Marines made up less than 9% of the Corps' total strength, and their integration into combat roles remained a subject of ongoing debate within military circles. Every public demonstration of female capabilities carried weight. Beyond the immediate audience, the joint training exercise itself had been designed to foster better cooperation between Marine units and their Navy counterparts. SEALs, corpsmen, and other naval personnel regularly worked alongside Marines in operational environments, but cultural differences sometimes created friction during training exercises. Today's combatives demonstration was supposed to showcase universal defensive techniques that could be applied by service members regardless of their branch or physical characteristics. Maya had been selected for the instructor role based on her unique combination of technical expertise and teaching ability. Her personnel file contained letters of recommendation from 3 different general officers, each praising her skill in translating complex combat techniques into understandable instruction. She had developed training curricula that were now used at 4 different Marine Corps installations, and her students consistently scored higher on practical combat assessments than those trained by other instructors. But her professional accomplishments had always existed alongside skepticism from certain quarters. Some Marines viewed female combatives instructors as necessary political concessions rather than legitimate tactical assets. Others questioned whether techniques demonstrated by women could be effectively applied by male Marines facing larger male opponents. These doubts had never been voiced directly to Maya, but she felt their weight in sideways glances and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. The presence of the 2 SEALs had represented both an opportunity and a risk. Their voluntary participation could have validated her instruction methods in front of a significant audience. Elite Special Operations personnel choosing to train with a female Marine instructor would send a powerful message about the universal applicability of her techniques. Instead, Morrison and Hawkins had apparently viewed the demonstration as an opportunity to publicly expose what they perceived as the limitations of female combat training. Their escalating aggression had been calculated to create a situation where Maya would be forced to acknowledge her physical disadvantages or risk being overpowered in front of 165 witnesses. They had miscalculated dramatically. Maya's response had been precise, proportional, and devastatingly effective. She had not struck in anger or lost control of the situation. Every movement had been a textbook application of the defensive techniques she had spent years perfecting. The injuries she inflicted were the direct result of Morrison and Hawkins' decision to ignore professional boundaries and escalate beyond the agreed parameters of the demonstration. The legal implications were straightforward. Maya had acted in self-defense against unwanted physical contact in a professional setting. The presence of over 100 witnesses would make it impossible for anyone to claim she had initiated the confrontation or used excessive force. Her measured response to inappropriate behavior would likely be viewed favorably by any investigating authority. The political implications were more complex. Maya's decisive handling of the situation would be celebrated by advocates for expanded female roles in combat operations. The image of a female staff sergeant defending herself against 2 larger male special operations personnel would become a powerful symbol of women's capabilities in military environments. But the same incident would also fuel arguments from those who opposed female integration. Critics would point to the escalation of a training exercise into actual violence as evidence that mixed-gender combat training created unnecessary complications. They would argue that traditional all-male training environments avoided such conflicts. By maintaining clear hierarchies and behavioral expectations, Maya understood these dynamics better than most. Her 8-year career had been shaped by the constant awareness that her actions reflected not just on herself, but on every woman who might follow in her path. The pressure to excel, to never show weakness, and to prove her worth repeatedly had become background noise that she had learned to ignore while still acknowledging its presence. The Marine Corps had invested significantly in her development as an instructor. She had attended advanced combatives courses at Fort Benning, Quantico, and Camp Leeuwen. The service had funded her civilian martial arts training and competition participation. She had been given opportunities to develop and refine training programs that would be used throughout the Corps. Her success represented a return on institutional investment that extended far beyond her individual career. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had grown up in East Los Angeles, the daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support 3 children. She had joined the Marines immediately after high school, drawn by the promise of stable employment and educational opportunities that her civilian environment could not provide. The transformation from uncertain teenager to confident professional had been aided by mentors who recognized her potential and helped her develop the skills that now set her apart. Master Sergeant Anthony Chun had been her first combatives instructor. At Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego, the compact, soft-spoken Marine had taught Maya that effective fighting was about intelligence and technique rather than raw aggression. His emphasis on understanding body mechanics and leverage had provided the foundation for everything she later learned. Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Thompson had been Maya's first female role model in the Corps. Thompson had commanded respect through quiet competence rather than dramatic gestures, showing Maya that leadership came from consistent performance rather than attention-seeking behavior. The lessons in professional bearing and emotional control had proven invaluable. Throughout Maya's career, Colonel James Martinez had recognized Maya's potential as an instructor and recommended her for advanced training opportunities. His willingness to advocate for her development, despite institutional resistance to promoting female combat trainers, had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Maya's current position was largely due to his mentorship and support. These relationships had taught Maya that her success was not just personal achievement, but part of a larger effort to expand opportunities for future generations of female Marines. Every technique she mastered, every student she trained, and every barrier she broke contributed to changing perceptions about women's capabilities in military roles. The crowd of Marines watching her now represented the next generation of that change. Some would return to their units with new respect for female capabilities. Others would share stories about the staff sergeant who broke 2 SEALs' arms with clinical precision. A few might reconsider their own assumptions about the relationship between physical size and combat effectiveness. Maya could see these realizations playing out across the faces in the bleachers. Young Marines who had never worked with female combat instructors were processing new information about what was possible. Senior non-commissioned officers were evaluating how this incident would affect their own training programs. Officers were calculating the administrative and political consequences of what they had witnessed. The gymnasium's ventilation system continued its steady hum, circulating air that now carried a subtle tension. The rubber smell of the training mats mixed with the lingering scent of the medical supplies that had been used to treat Morrison and Hawkins. Fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, casting momentary shadows that seemed to emphasize the gravity of what had occurred. Colonel Vance stood slowly, her movement drawing the attention of every Marine in the gymnasium. Her decision to remain for the continuation of the demonstration would signal institutional support for Maya's actions. Any suggestion that the training exercise should be canceled or that Maya should be relieved would undermine confidence in the Corps' commitment to its female personnel. The colonel's voice carried clearly through the space when she spoke, her tone neutral but authoritative. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, are you prepared to continue the scheduled training? Maya's response was immediate and confident. Yes, ma'am. I believe today's events have provided an excellent foundation for discussing the practical application of defensive techniques in realistic scenarios. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Maya had just reframed the entire incident as a planned educational opportunity rather than an unfortunate disruption of the training schedule. Her ability to maintain professional composure while acknowledging the significance of what had occurred demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership the Marine Corps sought to develop in its non-commissioned officers. Captain Walsh looked up from his phone, relief visible on his face as he realized that the demonstration would continue as scheduled. The administrative complications of the injured SEALs would still require attention, but the training exercise would not be canceled due to the incident. Maya walked to the edge of the mat and addressed the crowd directly, her voice projecting easily through the gymnasium without appearing to strain. What you just witnessed was the result of clear communication followed by appropriate defensive action. We will now examine the specific techniques involved and discuss how they can be adapted for various scenarios you may encounter. The transition from dramatic confrontation to professional instruction was seamless. Maya had transformed a potentially career-ending incident into a teaching moment that would enhance her reputation rather than damage it. The Marines in the audience leaned forward with renewed attention, eager to learn from someone who had just proven her techniques under the most realistic conditions possible. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had not just defended herself against inappropriate behavior. She had demonstrated that competence, preparation, and professional bearing could overcome any challenge. The lesson would resonate far beyond the confines of this single training session. 20-7 minutes earlier, Maya had been reviewing her lesson plan in the instructor preparation room adjacent to the main gymnasium. The small space contained a metal desk, 2 folding chairs, and a whiteboard covered with diagrams of joint locks and pressure points. Her gear bag sat open on the floor, revealing neatly organized training equipment, protective padding, demonstration, weapons, and medical supplies that she hoped would remain unused. The knock on the door had been firm but respectful. Maya looked up from her notes to see Captain Walsh standing in the doorway with 2 men she didn't recognize. Both wore Navy working uniforms with the distinctive special warfare insignia that identified them as SEALs. Their posture and bearing immediately marked them as experienced operators rather than fresh graduates from basic underwater demolition training. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I'd like you to meet Petty Officer Morrison and Petty Officer Hawkins, Captain Walsh had said, his tone carrying the forced enthusiasm of an officer trying to facilitate cooperation between different service branches. They volunteered to assist with your demonstration today. Maya had stood and offered her hand to each man in turn. Morrison's grip was unnecessarily firm, his calloused palm pressing against hers with more pressure than a simple introduction required. Hawkins had held the handshake a fraction longer than professional courtesy demanded, his eyes scanning her frame with obvious assessment. Both reactions had been subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation but clear enough to communicate their attitudes. Maya had dealt with similar behavior throughout her career and recognized the pattern immediately. These men viewed her not as a fellow professional, but as a challenge to be overcome or a weakness to be exploited. I appreciate your willingness to participate, Maya had responded, her tone remaining neutral despite her growing awareness that the planned demonstration might become complicated. Have you had a chance to review the training outline? Morrison had shrugged, his expression suggesting that he considered preparation unnecessary for what he viewed as a simple physical exercise. We've done plenty of hand-to-hand training. I'm sure we can keep up with whatever you have planned. The dismissive tone had been another warning sign. Professional soldiers understood that effective training required preparation regardless of their individual experience levels. Morrison's casual attitude suggested that he was more interested in proving a point than learning new techniques. Hawkins had been slightly more diplomatic but equally concerning. We're looking forward to seeing what the Marine Corps teaches. It's female personnel. It should be interesting. The pause before interesting had been deliberate, loaded with implications that Maya chose not to address directly. She had learned early in her career that responding to every subtle slight would consume energy better spent on professional performance. Instead, she focused on establishing clear parameters for the demonstration. The session will cover defensive techniques against larger opponents, Maya had explained, pulling a laminated instruction card from her gear bag. We'll demonstrate proper body positioning, leverage applications, and escape methods. The emphasis is on technique rather than strength, so controlled movements will be essential. She had handed the card to Morrison, who glanced at it briefly before passing it to his partner. Neither man seemed particularly interested in the detailed breakdown of planned activities, but Maya continued her briefing to ensure there could be no confusion about expectations. All demonstrations will be conducted at reduced speed and intensity, she had emphasized. The goal is educational rather than competitive. I'll call out each technique as we perform it, so the audience can follow along. Morrison had nodded, but his body language suggested impatience with the detailed explanation. Sounds straightforward enough. When do we start? The eagerness in his voice had been another red flag. Professional instructors knew that rushing through safety briefings was a recipe for accidents or misunderstandings. Maya had made a mental note to be especially careful about maintaining control of the demonstration's pace and intensity. We begin in 15 minutes, Maya had replied. I'd like to spend a few more minutes reviewing the specific techniques we'll be demonstrating. The more familiar you are with the sequence, the smoother the presentation will be. Hawkins had checked his watch with obvious impatience. We'll be fine. How complicated can it be? The question had revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what effective instruction required. Complex techniques appeared simple when performed by experts, but that simplicity was the result of thousands of hours of practice and refinement. Maya had spent years developing the muscle memory that made her movements look effortless. The techniques themselves are straightforward, Maya had conceded. But timing and positioning are critical. Small mistakes can turn a successful defense into a failed attempt. Morrison had laughed, the sound containing more skepticism than humor. I think we can handle whatever you throw at us, Staff Sergeant. The use of her rank had been technically correct, but subtly mocking. Morrison's tone suggested that he viewed her position as instructor to be somewhat artificial, granted by policy, rather than earned through competence. Maya had dealt with similar attitudes from male Marines early in her career, but she had expected more professionalism from elite special operations personnel. Maya had decided to proceed with the detailed briefing regardless of their apparent disinterest. If problems arose during the demonstration, she wanted to be able to point to comprehensive preparation on her part. We'll start with basic stance and movement, then progress through wrist escapes, bear hug defenses, and finishing with ground fighting fundamentals. She had demonstrated each technique slowly, explaining the key points that made them effective. Morrison and Hawkins had gone through the motions of following along, but their attention seemed focused more on her physical movements than the technical details she was explaining. The most important principle to remember is that these techniques rely on precision rather than power, Maya had stressed. Proper angle and timing can overcome significant strength advantages. Morrison had exchanged another look with Hawkins, the nonverbal communication suggesting shared skepticism about her claims. Maya had seen that same expression countless times from Marines who believed that combat was ultimately about who was stronger or more aggressive. We'll see about that, Morrison had muttered, the words quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability, but clear enough to communicate his challenge. Maya had chosen not to respond directly to the provocation. Instead, she had continued with her preparation checklist, ensuring that all required safety equipment was present and properly positioned. The medical kit was fully stocked, the training mats were properly secured to the floor, and emergency contact information was posted clearly near the exit. Any questions about the planned sequence? Maya had asked as she finished her equipment check. Just one, Hawkins had replied. What happens if things get a little more dynamic than planned? The question had been phrased as innocent curiosity, but Maya recognized it as a probe to test her reactions. Hawkins was trying to determine how she would respond if the demonstration evolved beyond her carefully controlled parameters. All training will remain within the specified safety guidelines, Maya had answered firmly. If anyone becomes unable to continue safely, we'll pause and reassess. Morrison had smiled, but the expression hadn't reached his eyes. Of course. Safety first. The mock agreement had been more concerning than outright hostility would have been. Maya had dealt with openly aggressive behavior before and knew how to respond appropriately. But Morrison and Hawkins were being more subtle, maintaining a veneer of cooperation while clearly planning something beyond what she had outlined. Maya had made one final attempt to establish clear boundaries. I want to emphasize that this is a controlled demonstration, not a competition. The audience is here to learn techniques they can apply in their own training. Our role is to provide clear examples of proper execution. Both SEALs had nodded their understanding, but Maya could sense that they had their own agenda for how the session would unfold. She had faced similar situations before and knew that the best response was to maintain professional standards while being prepared to adapt if circumstances changed. Captain Walsh had returned to collect them as the scheduled start time approached. The gymnasium is full, he had reported with obvious satisfaction. Word spread quickly about today's demonstration. We have representatives from every major unit on base. The large audience would amplify whatever happened during the training session. A successful demonstration would enhance Maya's reputation and validate her instruction methods. But any problems would be witnessed by a significant cross-section of the Marine Corps' leadership structure. Maya had gathered her notes and secured her gear bag, running through her mental checklist one final time. The lesson plan was solid, her equipment was properly prepared, and she had briefed the volunteer participants on their roles. Everything that could be controlled had been addressed. The walk from the preparation room to the gymnasium had taken less than 2 minutes, but it represented a transition from preparation to performance. Maya had learned to use that brief journey to shift her mindset from instructor to demonstrator, from someone explaining concepts to someone proving their validity. The noise from the assembled Marines had been audible even before they entered the main space. 165 voices created a steady rumble of conversation that spoke to the level of interest in the scheduled training. Maya had felt the familiar pre-performance tension that accompanied any public demonstration, but she had also felt confident in her preparation and abilities. Morrison and Hawkins had walked beside her, their demeanor shifting subtly as they approached the performance space. The casual dismissiveness they had shown during the briefing was replaced by something more focused and predatory. Maya had recognized the change and realized that whatever they had been planning was about to unfold. The gymnasium doors had opened to reveal the packed bleachers and the blue training mats spread across the center of the floor. Harsh fluorescent lights eliminated shadows and created the stark visibility necessary for detailed instruction. The concrete walls would amplify every sound, ensuring that the entire audience could follow the verbal components of the demonstration. Maya had stepped onto the mats with Morrison and Hawkins following behind her. The audience's conversations had gradually died away as the three figures took their positions in the center of the training area. The moment of transition from preparation to performance had arrived. There was no turning back now. Whatever Morrison and Hawkins had planned, whatever agenda they were pursuing beyond the stated training objectives, it would all play out in front of the largest audience Maya had ever addressed. Her reputation, her career, and her ability to continue serving as an advocate for female Marines would all be determined by how she handled the next 30 minutes. Maya had positioned herself facing the crowd, her posture confident but not arrogant. Morrison and Hawkins had flanked her, their stances subtly aggressive despite the educational context. The stage was set for a demonstration that none of the three participants expected to unfold according to the planned script. The first sign of deliberate escalation came during the third technique demonstration. Maya had been showing proper defensive stance against a front-facing grab when Morrison applied significantly more grip pressure than the controlled resistance she had outlined during their briefing. His fingers dug into her forearm with enough force to leave marks, and his stance shifted from cooperative training partner to genuine grappler, attempting to overpower her position. Maya adapted without breaking her instructional rhythm, using the increased resistance to demonstrate the effectiveness of proper leverage application. She rotated her arm in a smooth arc that broke Morrison's grip while simultaneously creating distance between them. The technique worked exactly as intended, but she could feel the shift in dynamics that signaled their planned cooperation was deteriorating. "Notice how the defender doesn't fight strength with strength," Maya explained to the audience, her voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium despite the tension she was managing. "The circular motion redirects the attacker's force while creating an escape opportunity." Several Marines in the front row leaned forward to get a better view of her hand positioning. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez, a military police officer from the 3rd Battalion, took notes in a small notebook as Maya repeated the technique with slower, more deliberate movements. The educational value of the demonstration remained high. Despite Morrison's attempts to disrupt it, Hawkins had been observing the interaction between Maya and his partner, and she could see him calculating his own approach for when his turn came. The predatory focus in his eyes had intensified, and his body language suggested he was preparing to escalate beyond whatever Morrison had attempted. "Staff Sergeant, what if the attacker is significantly larger and stronger?" called out Lance Corporal David Kim from somewhere in the middle section of bleachers. The question was legitimate and provided Maya with an opportunity to address the underlying assumptions that Morrison and Hawkins seemed determined to test. "Excellent question, Lance Corporal," Maya responded, grateful for the chance to reinforce key principles. Size and strength advantages become irrelevant when proper technique is applied to anatomical weak points. The human body has specific vulnerabilities that don't change based on physical conditioning. She gestured for Morrison to resume the grab position, noting the slight smirk on his face as he complied. This time, he applied even more pressure, his grip tight enough to restrict blood flow to her hand. Maya could feel the deliberate provocation, but maintained her professional demeanor, while preparing to demonstrate exactly what she had just explained. Instead of the gentle redirection she had shown moments earlier, Maya applied the same technique with full commitment. Her arm rotation was sharp and precise, targeting the specific pressure point where Morrison's thumb connected to his wrist. The leverage was unavoidable. His choice was to release his grip or risk serious injury to his own joint. Morrison let go with a sharp intake of breath, shaking his hand as circulation returned to fingers that had gone momentarily numb from the pressure point application. His expression showed surprise and the beginning of genuine anger rather than the calculated testing he had been employing. "The key is precision rather than power," Maya continued, her tone remaining educational despite the fact that she had just delivered a painful lesson to her volunteer partner. "When technique is applied correctly, the size differential becomes irrelevant." Colonel Vance nodded approvingly from her position in the front row. As an experienced officer, she could recognize the difference between planned instruction and the improvised adaptation Maya was demonstrating. The staff sergeant was maintaining training objectives while dealing with increasingly uncooperative partners. Hawkins stepped forward for the next sequence, which involved defending against a bear hug attack from behind. The technique required trust between participants, since the defender would be temporarily vulnerable while the attacker maintained a position of apparent control. Maya had specifically chosen this demonstration because it showcased how proper body mechanics could overcome significant strength disadvantages. Petty Officer Hawkins will apply a bear hug from the rear position, Maya explained as she turned her back to the seal. The key to escape is dropping the center of gravity while creating space for arm movement. Hawkins wrapped his arms around her torso, but instead of the controlled pressure specified in her briefing, he squeezed hard enough to restrict her breathing. His forearms pressed against her ribcage with crushing force while his chest pinned her arms against her sides. The hold was painful and potentially dangerous, far beyond what any reasonable training scenario would require. Maya felt the deliberate escalation immediately. Hawkins was not just testing her technique. He was attempting to create a situation where she would be forced to submit or risk injury. The bear hug was tight enough to cause real distress, and his positioning made it clear that he had no intention of releasing the hold when she applied the standard escape method. The audience could sense the change in dynamics. Conversations died away as Marines focused intently on the action in the center of the mat. Some looked uncomfortable with the obvious power differential, while others leaned forward with anticipation to see how Maya would handle the genuine threat. Maya had two choices. She could tap out and acknowledge her inability to escape Hawkins' hold, which would undermine everything she was trying to demonstrate, or she could apply her techniques with sufficient force to guarantee escape. Regardless of his cooperation level, she chose the second option, instead of the controlled demonstration she had planned. Maya dropped her full weight suddenly while simultaneously driving her elbows backward into Hawkins' floating ribs. The combined impact of her body weight shift and the targeted strikes forced him to loosen his grip enough for her to spin within his arms. Once facing him, she drove her knee upward toward his solar plexus with precisely calculated force. Hawkins doubled over, gasping for breath as the knee strike knocked the wind out of him. Maya stepped back smoothly, her breathing controlled despite the genuine physical confrontation she had just navigated. The escape had been textbook perfect, but achieved through full contact application rather than cooperative demonstration. As you can see, the technique remains effective even when the attacker applies maximum force, Maya announced, her voice steady despite her elevated heart rate. The key is commitment to the movement sequence, regardless of the resistance encountered. Hawkins straightened slowly, his face flushed as he regained his breath. The cocky confidence he had displayed earlier was replaced by wariness and growing anger. Maya had not just escaped his hold. She had done so while making him look ineffective in front of a large audience. Morrison stepped closer, ostensibly to check on his partner, but actually positioning himself for whatever they had planned as their next escalation. Maya recognized the flanking movement and adjusted her own stance to maintain visual contact with both men while keeping the audience in her peripheral vision. "Let's move on to ground defense techniques," Maya announced, attempting to regain control of the demonstration's pace and structure. These methods are essential when an attacker attempts to use superior weight and position to maintain control. But Morrison had apparently decided that the time for subtle testing was over. Instead of following her transition to the next planned sequence, he stepped directly into her personal space with obvious aggressive intent. His movement was too quick and purposeful to be accidental, and his posture indicated that he was no longer interested in maintaining the pretense of cooperative training. "Actually, Staff Sergeant," Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent gymnasium, "I think we need to see how these techniques work against someone who isn't playing along." The challenge was explicit and public. Morrison was abandoning any pretense of following the planned training scenario in favor of a direct confrontation that would test Maya's abilities under genuinely hostile conditions. The shift from educational demonstration to personal challenge was complete. Maya felt the familiar calm that settled over her in genuinely dangerous situations. The pre-fight clarity that focused her attention while filtering out irrelevant distractions. Morrison was giving her no choice but to respond to his challenge. And she had learned long ago that hesitation in such moments was usually fatal. The techniques work against any level of resistance, Maya replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that came from absolute certainty in her abilities. Would you like me to demonstrate? The question was polite in form, but unmistakably an acceptance of Morrison's challenge. Every Marine in the audience understood that they were about to witness something beyond planned training. The demonstration had evolved into a genuine test of skills and will between a female staff sergeant and 2 male special operations personnel. Hawkins had recovered enough to rejoin his partner, and both SEALs now positioned themselves in a way that suggested coordinated action rather than individual challenges. Maya found herself facing 2 opponents who had abandoned any pretense of cooperation in favor of proving whatever point they believed her presence represented. The training mats beneath her feet provided solid footing, and the gymnasium's lighting eliminated any visual obstacles that might complicate her defensive responses. The audience was far enough away to avoid accidental involvement, but close enough to witness every detail of whatever was about to unfold. Maya had navigated through 15 minutes of increasingly aggressive testing while maintaining her instructional objectives and professional demeanor. But Morrison and Hawkins had apparently decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. They were preparing to force a direct confrontation that would settle their questions about female combat capabilities once and for all. The moment of genuine danger had arrived. Everything that happened next would determine not just the outcome of the demonstration, but the trajectory of Maya's career and the message sent to every female Marine who might follow in her path. The obstacles had been navigated, the escalation had been managed, but now she faced the ultimate test of her training and resolve. Morrison's hand was already reaching toward her shoulder as Hawkins shifted to flank her from the other side. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing that they were about to witness something that would be remembered long after the training exercise ended. Maya settled into her combat stance, her mind clear and her body ready. The time for adaptation and management was over. The time for definitive action had arrived. The gymnasium air seemed to thicken as Morrison's fingers made contact with Maya's shoulder. The touch lasted exactly 2.3 seconds, long enough for every witness to understand its inappropriate nature, long enough for Maya to register the violation of professional boundaries, and long enough for muscle memory developed through 8 years of training to override conscious thought. Maya's response was not emotional or reactive. It was the product of countless hours of drilling the same defensive sequence until it became as automatic as breathing. Her right hand moved in a precise arc that intercepted Morrison's wrist at the exact moment when his grip was transitioning from contact to control. The strike targeted the radial nerve cluster with surgical precision, using the ridge of her knuckles to apply maximum pressure to the smallest possible area. The sound of Morrison's radius fracturing was audible throughout the gymnasium, a sharp crack that cut through the silence like a gunshot. But Maya was already pivoting toward Hawkins, who had lunged forward either to assist his partner or to grab her from behind. Her elbow drove upward into his descending forearm with the full rotation of her torso behind it, creating a leverage differential that his bones could not withstand. Hawkins' ulna snapped with a wet grinding sound as the fracture propagated through the cortical bone. His scream joined Morrison's in a grotesque harmony that echoed off the concrete walls and fluorescent light fixtures. Both men dropped to their knees on the blue training mats, cradling their shattered limbs while their faces drained of color. Entire sequence had taken 5.8 seconds from initial contact to final impact. Maya remained in her defensive stance for another 3 heartbeats, her dark eyes scanning for additional threats before her posture gradually relaxed. Her breathing was controlled and steady, showing no signs of the adrenaline surge that typically accompanied violent encounters. Colonel Vance was the first to move, rising from her seat in the front row with the measured precision of an officer who had witnessed combat in 3 different theaters of operation. Her expression remained neutral, but her positioning sent a clear message to every Marine in the gymnasium. The commanding officer was not alarmed by Maya's defensive actions. The crowd of 165 Marines sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Some leaned forward in their seats as if trying to confirm that the broken bones and screaming men were real, rather than part of an elaborate training scenario. Others sat back with expressions of satisfaction, recognizing that justice had been served swiftly and decisively. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez set down her notebook and pulled out her phone to document the scene, understanding that this incident would require detailed reporting and potential legal review. Her military police training had taught her to preserve evidence and maintain chain of custody for any materials that might be relevant to subsequent investigations. Lance Corporal David Kim, who had asked the earlier question about defending against larger opponents, nodded slowly as he realized he had just received the most comprehensive answer possible. Maya's demonstration had proven beyond any doubt that proper technique could overcome significant size and strength advantages when applied with sufficient skill and commitment. Captain Derek Walsh approached the edge of the training mats with his clipboard pressed against his chest, his face pale as he calculated the administrative complexity of what had just occurred. 2 Navy personnel had been injured during a Marine Corps training exercise, creating potential inter-service complications that would require careful navigation through multiple command structures. Morrison attempted to stand, but immediately sat back down as waves of nausea swept over him. The compound fracture of his radius had damaged surrounding blood vessels, and bright red blood was beginning to seep through his fingers where bone fragments had punctured skin. His earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by shock and pain. Hawkins remained on his knees, rocking slightly as he tried to manage the agony radiating from his shattered forearm. The ulnar fracture had disrupted nerve pathways, leaving his hand partially numb while intensifying the pain signals from the break itself. His breathing was rapid and shallow, suggesting the onset of shock from both the injury and the psychological impact of his rapid defeat. Maya walked to the edge of the mat area and addressed the assembled Marines, her voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium without any apparent strain. What you have just witnessed represents the practical application of defensive techniques under realistic conditions. The injuries sustained by the volunteers were the direct result of their decision to escalate beyond the agreed parameters of this demonstration. The clinical precision of her statement impressed several senior non-commissioned officers in the audience. Maya was establishing a clear narrative that placed responsibility for the outcome on Morrison and Hawkins, while demonstrating that her response had been measured and appropriate. Her ability to maintain professional composure immediately after a violent encounter spoke to exceptional mental discipline. Master Sergeant Robert Thompson, a veteran infantry Marine with 4 combat deployments, stood and began clapping slowly. The sound echoed through the gymnasium as other Marines joined in, creating a wave of applause that acknowledged both Maya's technical skill and her professional handling of an impossible situation. The applause was not celebratory, but respectful. Recognition of competence demonstrated under pressure rather than entertainment at others' expense. Maya had earned the respect of 165 Marines through her actions, but more importantly, she had validated years of training and preparation in the most public forum possible. 2 Navy corpsmen pushed through the gymnasium entrance, their medical bags already open as they jogged toward the injured SEALs. Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Jennifer Martinez knelt beside Morrison, while her partner, Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Michael Roberts, began assessing Hawkins' condition. Both corpsmen worked with the efficient calm that marked experienced medical personnel. Compound fracture of the right radius with probable nerve involvement. Martinez reported into her radio as she began establishing 4 access in Morrison's uninjured arm. Patient is conscious and alert, but showing signs of early shock. We're going to need orthopedic surgery standing by. Roberts was simultaneously evaluating Hawkins' injury, his hands gently probing the swollen tissue around the fracture site. Closed fracture of the left ulna with displacement. Distal pulse is weak but present. This one's going to need surgical reduction as well. Maya watched the medical response with professional interest, ready to provide details about the mechanism of injury if asked by the treating personnel. Her strikes had been precisely targeted to cause immediate incapacitation without life-threatening damage, exactly what her training had emphasized for defensive situations. The stretchers arrived within minutes, carried by additional medical personnel who had been alerted by the initial radio calls. Morrison was loaded first, his injured arm immobilized in a temporary splint while 4 fluids began addressing his shock symptoms. Hawkins followed, his fracture stabilized with an inflatable splint that would prevent further displacement during transport. As the medical teams prepared to evacuate the injured SEALs, Morrison made eye contact with Maya for the first time since his injury. His expression showed pain, embarrassment, and perhaps the beginning of grudging respect for her abilities. The lesson he had intended to teach about female limitations had backfired spectacularly. Hawkins avoided looking at Maya entirely, his focus directed toward the gymnasium ceiling as the stretcher team prepared to move him. His earlier confidence had been completely shattered along with his bones, leaving him to contemplate how drastically his assumptions about female combat capabilities had been corrected. Colonel Vance stepped onto the training mats as the medical evacuation concluded, her presence commanding immediate attention from every Marine in the gymnasium. Her decision to publicly support the continuation of the training exercise would send a clear message about the institution's position regarding Maya's actions. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," the colonel said, her voice carrying the authority of command, "are you prepared to continue with the scheduled instruction?" Maya's response was immediate and confident. "Yes, ma'am." The demonstration of defensive techniques against non-compliant opponents has provided an excellent foundation for discussing practical applications in various scenarios. The reframing was masterful. Maya had transformed what could have been viewed as a training accident or disciplinary incident into a planned educational opportunity. Her ability to maintain instructional focus while processing the physical and emotional demands of actual combat demonstrated exactly the kind of mental toughness the Marine Corps sought to develop in its leaders. Several Marines in the audience shifted forward in their seats, eager to learn from someone who had just proven her techniques under the most realistic conditions possible. The academic discussion of leverage and pressure points had been replaced by practical demonstration of their effectiveness against genuinely resistant opponents. Maya returned to the center of the training mats, her posture relaxed but alert. The blood stains on the blue padding served as stark reminders of what had just occurred, but she seemed unaffected by their presence. Her focus remained entirely on the educational mission that had brought her to this gymnasium. "The techniques I just applied are the same ones we have been practicing throughout this session," Maya explained, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the space. The only difference was the level of commitment required by the non-cooperative nature of the opposition. Master Sergeant Thompson raised his hand, his expression serious but respectful. "Staff Sergeant, can you walk us through the specific applications you used? I think my Marines would benefit from understanding the precise mechanics." The request provided Maya with the opportunity to transition back into instructional mode while analyzing her own performance. She had successfully defended herself against 2 larger, stronger opponents, but the educational value of the encounter would be lost if she couldn't help others understand how to replicate her success. "Certainly, Master Sergeant," Maya replied, moving to demonstrate the hand positions and body mechanics she had employed. The first strike targeted the radial nerve cluster at the point where it passes over the radius bone. Proper angle and Timing made the pressure application unavoidable. She moved through the sequence slowly, showing how her body positioning had generated maximum force while minimizing her own vulnerability. The audience watched intently, taking mental notes about leverage principles and anatomical targets that could be applied in their own defensive situations. The second technique utilized upward elbow rotation against a descending forearm. Maya continued, demonstrating the movement that had shattered Hawkins' ulna. The mechanical advantage created by opposing force vectors made the fracture inevitable. Once contact was established, the clinical analysis of her defensive actions impressed the senior Marines in the audience. Maya was proving that her success had not been accidental or lucky, but the predictable result of superior training and tactical understanding. The lesson would resonate throughout the Marine Corps as word of the demonstration spread. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had not just defended herself against inappropriate behavior. She had provided 165 Marines with the most convincing possible demonstration of why technique, training, and mental preparation were more important than physical size or institutional prejudice. The moment of truth had revealed exactly what she was capable of accomplishing within 90 minutes of the demonstration's conclusion. Cell phone videos of Maya's defensive actions had been uploaded to 17 different social media platforms by Marines who had witnessed the confrontation. The footage quality varied from grainy distant shots to crystal clear close-ups, but every angle confirmed the same narrative. A female staff sergeant had systematically dismantled two male SEALs who had violated professional boundaries. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Martinez, commanding officer of the Women Marines Association at Quantico, received the first official notification at 13:47 hours through encrypted military channels. The message was brief but comprehensive, outlining the basic facts while requesting guidance on media response protocols. Martinez immediately understood that this incident would generate attention far beyond normal training exercise reports. The cascade of communications began with Colonel Vance's initial report to the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit Headquarters. Her clinical assessment emphasized Maya's professionalism and the inappropriate behavior that had necessitated defensive action. The report included witness statements from 12 Marines representing different units and ranks, creating a comprehensive record that would withstand any subsequent investigation. Major General Patricia Chun, Commanding General of Marine Corps Training and Education Command, was briefed on the incident during her routine afternoon intelligence update. Chun had spent 26 years advocating for expanded roles for women in combat operations, and she immediately recognized the strategic implications of Maya's actions. This was not just a training incident, it was a defining moment for female integration policies. The ripple effects extended beyond official channels. Staff Sergeant James Wilson from the 2nd Combat Engineer Battalion had recorded a 3-minute video on his personal phone, capturing Maya's clinical explanation of pressure point applications immediately after the SEALs were evacuated. Wilson's commentary praised Maya's professionalism, while criticizing the inappropriate behavior that had precipitated the confrontation. "This is what happens when you mistake restraint for weakness," Wilson said in his video, which would eventually accumulate over 400,000 views across multiple platforms. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez gave those SEALs every opportunity to maintain professional standards. They chose to escalate, and they paid the price for their assumptions. The video resonated particularly strongly with female service members who had experienced similar challenges to their professional credibility. Corporal Ashley Davis, a military police officer stationed in North Carolina, shared Wilson's video with her own commentary about the importance of supporting competent female leaders, regardless of traditional gender expectations. Master Sergeant Robert Thompson used the incident as a teaching moment during his unit's evening formation. Thompson had served with Maya during her 2nd combat deployment and could speak authoritatively about her capabilities under operational conditions. His endorsement carried significant weight among infantry Marines who might otherwise dismiss the incident as politically motivated theater. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez didn't become an expert instructor through affirmative action, Thompson told his Marines. She earned that position by outperforming male and female competitors in every measurable category. What happened today was the predictable result of superior training meeting inferior judgment. The administrative aftermath proved as complex as Captain Walsh had anticipated. The Navy's Special Warfare Command initiated a formal investigation into the conduct of Morrison and Hawkins, focusing on their violation of joint training protocols and inappropriate behavior toward a Marine instructor. The investigation would ultimately result in formal reprimands and mandatory sensitivity training for both SEALs. Simultaneously, the Marine Corps conducted its own review of the incident, examining Maya's response to determine whether her defensive actions had been appropriate and proportional. The investigation concluded within 72 hours with a formal commendation for Maya's professionalism under extreme circumstances and a recommendation that her training methods be adopted corps-wide. The media attention began with military-focused publications but quickly expanded to mainstream outlets. The initial article in Military Times emphasized the technical aspects of Maya's defensive techniques while noting the broader implications for women in combat roles. The headline, "Marine Instructor Defends Training Standards Against Inappropriate Challenge," framed the incident in terms of professional competence rather than gender conflict. Cable news networks picked up the story within 6 hours, with varying interpretative approaches. Conservative commentators praised Maya's individual excellence while questioning whether the incident proved or disproved arguments about female combat integration. Liberal outlets focused on the systemic issues of harassment and disrespect that female service members faced throughout their careers. Social media response was overwhelmingly supportive of Maya's actions. The hashtag professional standards began trending within 12 hours, with thousands of posts from current and former service members sharing their own experiences with inappropriate behavior and praising Maya's decisive response. Female veterans particularly appreciated seeing someone with the skills and authority to immediately correct violations of professional boundaries. The impact on recruiting was immediate and significant. Marine Corps recruiting stations reported a 37% increase in inquiries from women interested in combat-related military occupational specialties. The image of Maya maintaining perfect composure while systematically defending herself had created a powerful recruitment tool that demonstrated both opportunity and capability. Captain Walsh found himself fielding interview requests from military journalists who wanted to understand the administrative context of the incident. His initial nervousness about potential complications had been replaced by recognition that the event had actually enhanced his unit's reputation for maintaining high professional standards. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez exemplifies the caliber of instruction we provide at all our joint training exercises, Walsh told Marine Corps Times. Her ability to maintain educational objectives while responding appropriately to unprofessional behavior demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership we want to develop in our non-commissioned officers. The training curriculum Maya had developed became the subject of intense interest from other installations. Within a week, requests for copies of her lesson plans and technique demonstrations had arrived from bases across the continental United States and overseas locations. The Marine Corps formalized this interest by designating Maya as the lead instructor for a new program aimed at standardizing defensive tactics training throughout the service. Female Marines stationed at installations around the world reported increased respect and attention from their male counterparts following the widespread circulation of Maya's story. The demonstration that technical competence could overcome physical advantages had shifted conversations about capability and integration in ways that years of policy debates had failed to accomplish. Lieutenant Sarah Jessica Parker, A logistics officer at Camp Leoyne noted the change in her weekly report to her commanding officer. The incident at Pendleton has created space for more honest discussions about professional standards and mutual respect. Male Marines are asking different questions about female capabilities, and the tone of those questions has improved significantly. The two SEALs involved faced consequences that extended well beyond their physical injuries. Morrison and Hawkins were reassigned to administrative duties pending completion of their medical treatment and the formal investigation into their conduct. Their reputations within the special operations community had been severely damaged by their public humiliation at the hands of a female instructor. The SEAL community's internal response was mixed but generally critical of Morrison and Hawkins. Behavior. Senior enlisted leaders emphasized that their actions had violated both professional standards and the tactical principles that elite units were supposed to embody. The consensus was that they had dishonored their training and their teammates through poor judgment and unprofessional conduct. Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rodriguez, no relation to Maya, addressed the incident during a command meeting at Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Elite operators are supposed to demonstrate superior judgment and tactical awareness. What happened at Pendleton was a failure of both. Those Marines deserved our respect and professionalism, not our prejudice and stupidity. The broader implications for joint training exercises were significant. New protocols were established requiring explicit consent procedures and clearer boundaries for all inter-service training activities. The changes were designed to prevent future incidents while ensuring that legitimate training objectives could still be accomplished. Maya's personal response to the attention was characteristically professional. She declined most interview requests, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves while focusing on her expanding responsibilities as a curriculum developer. When she did speak publicly, her emphasis remained on the importance of technical competence and professional standards rather than gender politics. The techniques I demonstrated are available to any service member willing to invest the time and effort required for mastery, Maya told the Marine Corps Gazette. Success in defensive situations depends on preparation, training, and commitment to excellence rather than physical characteristics that cannot be controlled. The incident had transformed Maya from a respected instructor into a Corps-wide symbol of professional excellence. Her image appeared on recruiting posters and training materials, representing the Marine Corps' commitment to developing leaders based on competence rather than traditional assumptions about gender roles. 3 months after the demonstration, Maya was selected for promotion to gunnery sergeant, with an assignment as the senior instructor at the Marine Corps' Martial Arts Center of Excellence. The position represented the highest level of recognition for her expertise and would allow her to influence training standards throughout the service. The cascade effect of those 6 seconds of defensive action had rippled through military culture. Recruiting practices, training protocols, and public perception of women in combat roles. Maya had not set out to become a symbol or catalyst for change. She had simply responded professionally to an unprofessional situation. But her competence under pressure had created opportunities and shifted perspectives in ways that formal policy changes had struggled to achieve. The story of Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez had become more than an account of individual excellence. It had evolved into evidence that preparation, skill, and professional bearing could overcome any challenge, regardless of the assumptions and prejudices that others might bring to the encounter. 2 years after the incident at Camp Pendleton, Gunnery Sergeant Maya Rodriguez stood before a new audience of 200 Marines at the Marine Corps Base Quantico. The auditorium was larger than the gymnasium where her reputation had been forged, but the attention in the room carried the same intensity. This time, however, she faced an audience that already knew exactly what she was capable of accomplishing. Marines before her represented every military occupational specialty in the Corps, from infantry riflemen to cyber warfare specialists. They had volunteered for the Advanced Defensive Tactics Instructor course that Maya now directed, a program that had evolved directly from the techniques she had demonstrated during that fateful joint training exercise. The course had become so popular that applications exceeded available slots by a ratio of 4-to-1. Maya's promotion to gunnery sergeant had been accompanied by an assignment as the senior instructor at the Marine Corps' Martial Arts Center of Excellence, a position that allowed her to influence training standards throughout the service. Her curriculum had been adopted at 17 different installations, and her instructional videos were now part of mandatory annual training for all Marine Corps personnel. The physical scars from her encounter with Morrison and Hawkins had long since faded, but the institutional changes that followed continued to reshape military culture in ways that surprised even Maya herself. The incident had catalyzed conversations about professional standards, mutual respect, and the true meaning of combat readiness that extended far beyond gender integration issues. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Chun, who had been promoted and reassigned to lead the Marine Corps' Combat Development Command, often referenced Maya's demonstration when discussing the evolution of modern military training. Chun's research had shown that units with female combat instructors consistently outperformed those with traditional all-male instruction teams, largely because of the technical precision and professional discipline that women brought to training environments. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez proved that excellence transcends physical characteristics, Chen wrote in the Marine Corps Gazette. Her influence on our training methodology has produced measurable improvements in combat readiness across all demographics. The lesson is not about women in combat. It's about competence and leadership. The two SEALs who had challenged Maya faced consequences that extended well beyond their immediate injuries. Morrison had required 3 surgeries to repair the damage to his radius and surrounding tissues. The fracture had healed with some loss of grip strength, ending his operational career and leading to medical retirement from the Navy. His final fitness report included formal documentation of the unprofessional conduct that had precipitated the incident. Hawkins had recovered more completely from his ulnar fracture, but the investigation into his behavior had revealed a pattern of similar incidents with female personnel during previous training exercises. He was ultimately separated from the Navy with an other-than-honorable discharge, ending a career that had once seemed destined for senior leadership positions within the special operations community. The broader SEAL community had used the incident as an opportunity for institutional self-reflection. New training protocols emphasized respect for all service members, regardless of gender, branch, or background. The arrogance and entitlement that had characterized Morrison and Hawkins' behavior were identified as toxic traits that undermined unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rodriguez had been promoted to Senior Enlisted Advisor for Naval Special Warfare Command, a position that allowed him to implement comprehensive changes to SEAL training and culture. His reforms emphasized that true elite status came from professional competence and ethical behavior rather than physical dominance or institutional privilege. The Pendleton incident taught us that respect must be earned through performance, not demanded through intimidation, Master Chief Rodriguez explained during a joint service leadership conference. Elite units that forget this lesson quickly discover they are neither elite nor effective. Maya's influence extended beyond military circles into civilian law enforcement and security training. Police departments in 12 different states had adopted variations of her defensive tactics curriculum, recognizing that the principles she taught were equally applicable to civilian situations involving disparate physical capabilities. The FBI's training academy at Quantico had invited Maya to conduct seminars on defensive techniques for female agents, acknowledging that her methods addressed real-world challenges that traditional training often ignored. Her emphasis on technique over strength had proven particularly valuable for agents who might face larger, Stronger suspects in the field. Corporate security firms had also begun incorporating Maya's training philosophy into their programs, recognizing that effective personal protection required more than size and aggression. The precision and professionalism she demonstrated had become a model for how security personnel should handle challenging situations without escalating to unnecessary violence. Maya's personal life had been transformed by her unexpected fame. Though she had worked diligently to maintain the privacy and normalcy that allowed her to continue focusing on her professional responsibilities, she had declined numerous offers for book deals, speaking engagements, and media appearances that might have been lucrative but would have distracted from her primary mission of training Marines. The marriage proposal from Captain Michael Thompson, a Marine pilot she had met during a joint training exercise in Japan, had been accepted with characteristic deliberation and planning. Thompson understood that Maya's career would always involve travel, irregular schedules, and high-pressure situations that required complete professional dedication. Their relationship was built on mutual respect for each other's expertise and commitment to service. Maya's parents, who had immigrated from Mexico when she was 5 years old, had initially struggled to understand their daughter's choice of military career. But the recognition and respect she had earned through her performance had helped them appreciate that she had found a profession that valued her intelligence, dedication, and skill rather than limiting her opportunities based on traditional gender expectations. Mia, you have shown the world that strength comes from preparation and character, not from size and anger, her mother, Elena Rodriguez, had said during Maya's promotion ceremony. You make all of us proud, not just because of what you accomplished, but because of how you accomplished it. The recruiting impact of Maya's story had exceeded all projections. Female enlistment in combat-related military occupational specialties had increased by 43% in the 2 years following the Pendleton incident. More significantly, retention rates for women in combat roles had improved dramatically as the culture began to reflect the values that Maya had demonstrated. Young women across the country had seen in Maya's example proof that they could succeed in traditionally male-dominated fields through competence and preparation rather than by accepting limitations or lowering standards. The image of a confident professional who could defend herself while maintaining perfect composure had inspired applications to military academies, law enforcement agencies, and other challenging career fields. The Marine Corps had formally recognized Maya's contributions with the Navy and Marine Corps' Achievement Medal, citing her exceptional professional competence and dedication to training excellence that has enhanced combat readiness throughout the Marine Corps. The citation specifically noted her ability to maintain instructional objectives while defending professional standards under extreme circumstances, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition had come from the Marines she trained on a daily basis. The feedback forms completed by students in her Advanced Defensive Tactics course consistently praised not just her technical expertise, but her ability to instill confidence in personnel who had previously doubted their own capabilities in challenging situations. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, a logistics specialist who had completed Maya's course 6 months earlier, credited the training with preventing a potential assault during a deployment to Afghanistan. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez taught me that preparation and technique could overcome any physical disadvantage, Walsh wrote in her course evaluation. When I needed those skills in a real situation, they were there because she had made sure I understood them completely. The incident at Camp Pendleton had become a case study taught in leadership courses throughout the military education system. The scenario was analyzed not just for its technical aspects, but for the decision-making process that Maya had demonstrated under pressure. Her ability to maintain professional standards while responding appropriately to escalating aggression was held up as a model of effective leadership in crisis situations. Maya's legacy extended beyond her individual achievements to the institutional changes that her actions had catalyzed. The Marine Corps had implemented new protocols for joint training exercises, established clearer guidelines for professional conduct during instruction, and created reporting mechanisms that allowed personnel to address inappropriate behavior. Before it escalated to physical confrontation, the ripple effects had influenced other services as well. The Army had revised its combatives training to incorporate techniques similar to those Maya had developed. The Air Force had adopted her instructional methodology for security forces training. Even the Coast Guard had requested copies of her curriculum for use in law enforcement training programs. As Maya looked out at the 200 Marines assembled for her current class, she could see the confidence and professionalism that had become standard rather than exceptional. The culture that had once questioned women's capabilities in combat roles had evolved to recognize that competence was what mattered, regardless of gender, background, or physical characteristics. The transformation had not been complete, or universal institutional change never was. But the conversation had shifted from whether women belonged in combat roles to how all personnel could be trained to maximum effectiveness. Maya's demonstration had provided an undeniable example that preparation, skill, and professional bearing could overcome any challenge. The techniques you will learn in this course are the same ones I used that day at Pendleton, Maya told her new students, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. They work not because I am special, but because they are based on sound principles that anyone can master with sufficient dedication and practice. She paused, looking around the auditorium at faces that represented the future of the Marine Corps, young men and women who would carry forward the lessons she taught and the example she had set. Marines who would face their own moments of challenge and decision with the tools and confidence she was providing. Your success will not depend on your size, your gender, or your background, Maya continued. It will depend on your willingness to prepare thoroughly, train consistently, and act decisively when circumstances demand it. Those are qualities that every Marine can develop, and every Marine must possess. The lesson that had begun in a gymnasium at Camp Pendleton was now being transmitted to a new generation of Marines who would carry it forward into whatever challenges awaited them. Maya's story had become more than an account of individual triumph. It had evolved into a blueprint for professional excellence that transcended the circumstances of its origin. Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez had entered that gymnasium 2 years ago as a competent instructor trying to do her job. She had emerged as Gunnery Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, a symbol of what was possible when preparation met opportunity, when skill encountered prejudice, and when professionalism overcame assumption. Legacy was not just her own, it belonged to every service member who had been inspired by her example to pursue their own excellence, and to every person who had learned that true strength came not from size or aggression, but from competence, preparation, and the courage to act when action was required. 5 years had passed since the gymnasium at Camp Pendleton had witnessed 6 seconds that changed military culture forever. Master Sergeant Maya Rodriguez now stood in the Pentagon, her dress blue uniform adorned with ribbons that told the story of a career defined by excellence, innovation, and unwavering professional integrity. The Bronze Star on her Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal caught the light as she prepared to address the Joint Chiefs of Staff about the future of military training. The briefing room held more power per square foot than any space Maya had ever entered. General Patricia Morrison, the first woman to serve as Commandant of the Marine Corps, sat at the head of the table alongside the other service chiefs. The irony of the name was not lost on Maya. This Morrison had earned her position through decades of distinguished service, unlike the SEAL who had shared her surname and challenged Maya's authority years earlier. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, General Morrison began, her voice carrying the authority that had made her a legend in Marine Corps history. Your training methodology has produced measurable improvements in combat readiness across all services. We're here to discuss implementation of your program at the joint service level. Maya's presentation materials lay organized before her, but she barely needed to reference them. The statistics were burned into her memory through years of tracking and analysis. Her Advanced Defensive Tactics program had been adopted by 43 military installations worldwide. Personnel trained under her methodology showed a 37% improvement in successful defensive encounters during operational deployments. More significantly, units with female combat instructors reported higher levels of unit cohesion, lower rates of disciplinary incidents, and improved performance on readiness evaluations. The data contradicted decades of assumptions about military effectiveness and had forced institutional leaders to confront uncomfortable truths about their own biases. The program's success stems from its focus on technical mastery rather than physical dominance, Maya explained to the assembled general officers. When service members understand that competence trumps strength, they develop confidence in their own abilities and respect for others' expertise. Admiral Jennifer Chun, Chief of Naval Operations, leaned forward with obvious interest. Her own rise through the Navy's ranks had been marked by similar challenges to those Maya had faced, though Chun's battles had been fought in briefing rooms and budget meetings rather than on training mats. Master Sergeant, your approach has implications beyond individual training. The cultural shift you've catalyzed has affected everything from recruitment to retention to operational effectiveness. How do we ensure these changes become permanent rather than temporary? The question struck at the heart of Maya's deepest concerns. Institutional change was fragile, dependent on continued leadership support and cultural reinforcement. The progress made since the Pendleton incident could be reversed if future leaders decided to return to traditional approaches that prioritized familiar hierarchies over proven effectiveness. Permanence requires embedding these principles into our foundational training rather than treating them as specialized programs, Maya responded. Every recruit, regardless of gender or background, should graduate with the understanding that professional competence is the only valid measure of military worth. The transformation Maya described was already underway at recruit training depots across all services. Drill instructors had been retrained to emphasize technical proficiency alongside physical conditioning. The message delivered to new service members had evolved from "prove you're tough enough" to "prove you're competent enough." Colonel Sarah Martinez, representing the Army's Training and Doctrine Command, provided supporting data from her services. Implementation efforts. We've seen a 41% reduction in training injuries since adopting Sergeant Rodriguez's emphasis on technique over force. More importantly, our graduates demonstrate higher confidence levels and better decision-making under stress. The ripple effects extended into unexpected areas of military life. Sexual assault rates had declined significantly at installations that had implemented Maya's training programs. The emphasis on professional respect and clear boundaries had created environments where inappropriate behavior was less likely to occur and more likely to be reported when it did happen. Maya's personal journey from Staff Sergeant to Master Sergeant had been accelerated by her unique contributions to military training and culture. Her promotion had been accompanied by assignment to the Pentagon as Senior Advisor for Defensive Tactics Policy, a position created specifically to leverage her expertise at the highest levels of military decision-making. The assignment had required Maya to develop skills far beyond combat instruction. She now navigated the complex politics of inter-service cooperation, congressional budget hearings, and media relations with the same precision she had once applied to pressure point techniques. Her ability to translate tactical knowledge into strategic policy had proven as valuable as her original instructional expertise. Jake Morrison, the former SEAL whose inappropriate behavior had precipitated Maya's rise to prominence, had struggled with the aftermath of his medical retirement. His attempts to find civilian employment had been complicated by the widespread knowledge of his role in the Pendleton incident. The video footage of his humiliation had become a permanent part of his professional reputation, following him through job interviews and background checks. Morrison's eventual employment as a security consultant for a private firm had required him to undergo sensitivity training and anger management counseling. The irony was bitter. He now worked under protocols that emphasized exactly the professional respect and technical competence that he had once dismissed. His new colleagues included several female security specialists whose abilities he was required to acknowledge and respect. Brett Hawkins had faced even more severe consequences. His other-than-honorable discharge had closed off most employment opportunities in security or law enforcement. His attempts to reinvent himself as a fitness instructor had been undermined by the same video footage that haunted Morrison. Potential clients were reluctant to hire someone whose judgment and professionalism had been so publicly questioned. The broader SEAL community had internalized the lessons of the Pendleton incident more successfully than the individuals who had precipitated it. New selection and training protocols emphasized emotional intelligence and cultural competence alongside traditional physical requirements. The warrior ethos that had once prioritized dominance had evolved to recognize that true elite status required professional excellence in all dimensions of performance. Maya's influence on military culture had extended into civilian sectors in ways that continued to surprise observers. Police departments nationwide had adopted her training methods, recognizing that the same principles that worked in military environments applied equally to law enforcement situations. The emphasis on de-escalation through competence rather than escalation through intimidation had proven particularly valuable for officers dealing with diverse communities. Corporate security firms had discovered that Maya's approach produced better outcomes at lower cost than traditional models based on physical intimidation. Clients preferred security personnel who could resolve conflicts through professional competence rather than those who relied on size and aggression. The business case for technical training had proven as compelling as the ethical arguments. Educational institutions had begun incorporating Maya's story into curricula ranging from business leadership to women's studies. The narrative of competence overcoming prejudice resonated across disciplines and demographics. Students learned that preparation, skill, and professional bearing could triumph over institutional bias and personal prejudice. Maya's marriage to Colonel Michael Thompson had produced twin daughters, whose birth had added new dimensions to her perspective on military service and gender equality. Elena and Sophia Rodriguez Thompson would grow up in a world where their mother's achievements had expanded possibilities for their own futures. The legacy Maya was creating extended beyond her immediate professional contributions to the opportunities she was creating for the next generation. The military daycare center at Quantico had commissioned a mural depicting significant moments in Marine Corps' history. Among the images of battles and ceremonies was a representation of Maya's defensive stance from the Pendleton demonstration. The artist had captured not the violence of the moment, but the calm confidence that had defined her response to an impossible situation. Maya's parents had become reluctant celebrities in their East Los Angeles community, frequently asked to speak about their daughter's achievements and the values that had shaped her character. Elena Rodriguez's emphasis on preparation and education had proven prophetic, creating the foundation for success that had enabled Maya to seize her moment when it arrived. We taught her that respect must be earned through performance, not demanded through position, Elena explained to a reporter from the Los Angeles Times. Maya succeeded because she was always prepared to prove her worth through her actions rather than her words. The international implications of Maya's story had emerged gradually as foreign military services studied American training innovations. NATO allies had requested access to her curriculum, recognizing that the principles she taught could enhance their own force readiness. The techniques that had broken two SEALs' arms in a California gymnasium were now being practiced by soldiers. In 17 different countries, Maya's final presentation to the Joint Chiefs concluded with a simple but profound observation that summarized everything she had learned during her journey from uncertain recruit to senior advisor. Excellence is not about proving superiority over others, she told the assembled leaders. Excellence is about maximizing your own potential while creating opportunities for others to do the same. The strongest military is one where every service member can contribute their best abilities without artificial limitations. General Morrison nodded slowly, understanding that Maya's words applied to her own historic appointment as much as to the training programs under discussion. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, your recommendations will be implemented across all services, effective immediately. The transformation you've described is not just desirable, it's essential for maintaining military effectiveness in an evolving strategic environment. As Maya gathered her materials and prepared to leave the briefing room, she reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. A 6-second defensive action had evolved into a decades-long transformation of military culture. The gymnasium at Camp Pendleton had been the catalyst, but the real change had occurred in countless training sessions, policy discussions, and individual conversations across the years that followed. The two SEALs who had challenged her authority had inadvertently created space for a conversation about merit, respect, and professional competence that might not have occurred otherwise. Their inappropriate behavior had provided Maya with the platform to demonstrate principles that extended far beyond defensive tactics. Master Sergeant Maya Rodriguez walked through the Pentagon corridors knowing that her influence would outlast her career, her service, and perhaps even her lifetime. The young women entering military service would inherit opportunities that previous generations could not have imagined. The men serving alongside them would understand that competence, not gender, determined professional worth. The legacy of those 6 seconds at Camp Pendleton would continue rippling through military culture, civilian institutions, and individual lives for generations to come. Maya had not set out to change the world. She had simply responded professionally to an unprofessional situation. But competence, when demonstrated under pressure, had the power to transform everything it touched. The eternal impact of her story would be measured not in the bones she had broken, but in the barriers she had shattered, the opportunities she had created, and the example she had set for anyone who refused to accept artificial limitations on their potential for excellence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.